Should you be wearing barefoot shoes? Today we find out why minimalist footwear might be the best thing for your feet, your knees, and your achy back. So I've got a friend who has flat feet.
Stop right there. Who gives a shit?
You think, oh, it's just about shoes, right? But it's just so much more than that.
In our case, on the barefoot side, it's not about shoes at all. It's about your body and optimal human functioning.
I really wish I'd had this conversation before I did all my research a year ago because...
Well, that's why we're doing it now, out of the goodness of your heart, to spare people the pain that you went through. I'm here to help try and change the world. And I want to do as much as I can before I die. And I'm getting a little choked up because a year ago, it was iffy about whether I might.
I'm Ollie Guillou, and welcome to Hack It Health and Fitness, where I meet the people behind some of the most interesting health innovations, technology, and fitness hacks on the market. Today, I'm joined by the CEO of barefoot shoe brand Xero, Sashen. I've worn barefoot shoes now for about a year, and before I took the plunge, I did a lot of research, but it was tough. There's a lot of conflicting advice out there. That's why I loved this conversation. If you're interested in barefoot shoes or you just want to know a little bit more about how they work, don't scroll Google, listen to this. First of all, thank you so much for being on Hack It. Really appreciate your time. I really want to just jump straight in with how barefoot shoes actually work. Like, what's the science that underpins what they're doing to your feet?
This is going to sound crazy, but I'm going to talk about the opposite of what you just asked. So human beings have been basically in bare feet, or the early shoes were something to protect the bottom of your foot, something to hold that on your foot. That's what human beings have been doing for 99.9975% of human history. The modern athletic shoe, completely new innovation, about 50 years old. The real question is, where's the proof of the value of that intervention? And I can tell you the answer is nowhere. In fact, quite the opposite. So before we get into the science part, let's just do some common sense part, because what we're really talking about is not about footwear, but about optimal human functioning. Okay. And the basic premise, I'll just do this off the top, about, quote, barefoot shoes is we're getting out of the way to let your body do what your body was meant to do. So let's just address that. Let me also preface this by saying I'm not here to try and talk everyone into getting out of whatever shoe you're wearing and into a barefoot or minimalist shoe. Although I will say, I'll tease this, there is a time and a place, no matter what you're currently wearing, for something like this. And this will become a little more obvious when I do this little intro. So I like to ask these questions in a kind of upside down way. Can you think of a time where weaker is better than stronger?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
So if you want to make, say, your arm weaker, what would you do?
I would stop working out.
Yeah,
I
don't
would
work
maybe
out.
just stop using it altogether.
Yeah, put your arm in a cast, it's going to get weaker. Yeah. So if you have a shoe that doesn't move, that doesn't let your foot move, there's a quarter of the bones and joints of your whole body in your feet and ankles. If you make bones not move, all the tissue around them, muscles, ligaments, and tendons, gets weaker. So if your shoe doesn't flex properly to let your foot bend and flex and move, it's going to get weaker. Not a good sign. Okay, let me do another one. You have more nerve endings in the soles of your feet than anywhere but your fingertips and your lips. Okay.
Wow.
So can you think of a time where numbness is better than feeling, other than it getting dental work?
Yeah, I was about to say I just had dental work, so that was definitely better. But otherwise, I would much rather to be able to feel.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you've got a shoe with a bunch of cushioning underneath it, a bunch of padding, how much can you feel through that?
Very little.
Little to none. So that means your brain isn't getting the stimulation that it needs to know what you're stepping on or stepping in to move your body properly, starting with being able to move your feet, which you can't do if you're in something stiff. Actually, I got to back up to a really fun one. Which is better, restriction or freedom?
Well, I'm getting a little bit of a sense of these questions, but
they
freedom.
all lead in the same direction. Now, I mean, people could argue they're leading questions, but they're really not. I mean, if you think about it. So I don't have a normal shoe with me. If I was at my office, I would. But if you look at the shape of most shoes, the toe box is pointy, squeezes your toes together. When is that good? The answer is never. First of all, if your big toe can't move, you're not engaging your arch, which makes it weaker. And we've already said weaker is not as good as stronger. If you're squeezing your toes together, that can lead to bunions. You don't do push-ups with your fingers all squished together. You do push-ups with your hand naturally spread apart, because that gives you better balance, better force production, better responsiveness. Same thing with your feet. Okay, so now we're 3 in. Let me give you one more, maybe 2 more. Which is better, being properly aligned or misaligned? I can't think of the appropriate, antonym for properly aligned that isn't using the word aligned.
Yeah, definitely properly aligned.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have a shoe that elevates your heel, that tips your center of mass or moves your center of mass forward, and you have to lean back somewhere, your ankle, your knee, your hip, your back. That ain't good. That puts stress on those joints. And so if you're on a flat surface, which a true barefoot shoe is, then you're able to be properly aligned. So you put all these things together, and that's all we're doing. We're letting your feet and body do what's natural. In fact, the biggest thing is with your feet. If you can't feel, bend, and move, all that function designed for your feet to do tries unsuccessfully to move upstream to your ankle, your knee, your hip, and your back, which aren't wired for those things. This is why we have literally tens of thousands of people, probably more at this point, who've responded saying, oh my God, since I'm wearing your shoes, my feet, ankles, hip, back feel better than they ever have. I'm able to do things I either haven't done in years or haven't been able to ever do before. Now, I can't make medical claims because I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet. I was a pre-med, but that doesn't count. So anyway, that's the basic premise, is we're letting your feet and body do what's natural. Now, some people will say, yeah, but I have flat feet or high arches. And I go, congratulations. Arch height is predominantly genetic. Height is not the important thing. Strength is the important thing. And we go back to weaker, better than stronger. So here I will throw in some research. Dr. Sarah Ridge and a number of other people have reproduced the same research, have shown that just by walking in a minimalist shoe, you build foot strength as much as if you did a foot exercise program. Now, it's not about the minimalist shoe. It's just letting your foot bend and flex. Let me just pull out a minimalist shoe. So to compare to a regular shoe, most regular shoes can't roll up in a ball like this. So it's not getting in the way of letting your feet bend and move. And again, you get stronger by using it. You get weaker by not using it. That's how you lose it. There's also research from Katrina Protopappas from a couple years ago, where they put arch support in the shoes of healthy individuals. So when you support your arch, just like supporting your arm with a cast, it gets weaker over time. And that's what they found. Up to 17% weaker in as little as 12 weeks. When it's weaker, better than stronger, it ain't. So backing up, and then I'll stop this rant. Again, the burden of proof is not on us. We are not the intervention. Humans functioning naturally is not the intervention. So let's go to the biggest footwear brand in the world and see what they say about this. So if you look on the Nike website, on their Run Fearless page, they published a portion of an abstract, which is already a summary, of a study that they did about 4.5 years ago, where they compared their best-selling running shoe, the Zoom Structure 22, to a new shoe they had developed called the React Infinity Run. It was a 12-week half-marathon training program that Nike developed. Nike paid for the research, but they had an independent university actually do the research. So here's where things get fun. In the 12-week study, the way Nike publicized this is that they said the new shoe reduced injury rates by 52%. Sounds amazing until you look at the numbers, which they finally, after 4 years, put on their website. The best-selling shoe in 12 weeks injured 52% of the people wearing it. I went overboard. 30.3% of the people wearing it. I was adding things up. My apologies. So 12 weeks, 30.3% of the people wearing their best-selling running shoe got injured. Injury rates, by the way, don't stay consistent over time. They go up over time. The new shoe only, quote unquote, only injured 14.5% of the people. Now, this raises a lot of questions. First of all, it's kind of commonly known in the industry that runners typically, about 50% of runners get injured every year, 80% of marathoners get injured every year. So that 30.3 and 14, as you extrapolate the way injury rates tend to go, is completely consistent with that. Now, here's some of the fun questions. Nike, you've been doing this for 50 years. Is that the best you can do? That's one. The second thing is, what made the better shoe better? They removed many of the protective features, quote unquote. They made it more minimalist. They got rid of things like excessive arch support and excessive heel support and all these various things. That made it a little better. Third question is, are you kidding me? I mean, imagine going into a running shoe store and saying, hey, what's your best shoe? And they go, yeah, here's one where roughly 1 out of 3 people are going to get injured wearing it. No, I don't want that one. How about 1 out of 7 people? How about you give me a shoe that doesn't injure people? Yeah, we don't make those. This is a running shoe store.
But given the nature of barefoot shoes, they are minimalistic. I'm a barefoot shoe wearer, so I'm going to announce that now, given that I may have some inherent bias because I do love wearing them. But they're thinner. They don't have any support, obviously, by their very nature. You feel closer to the ground as a result. So what you're getting is you're feeling a lot more, you're feeling rocks underneath your feet. You're feeling pretty much everything to some extent, not to the same degree you would if you were actually barefoot. But surely barefoot shoes also have an injurious nature to them, right?
Yes and no. I'm going to go with mostly no. And the reason is, again, we've been doing this for 14 years. And what we hear about, quote, injuries so infrequently, it's crazy. But let's back up a bit. This has nothing to do with the footwear. It has to do with optimal human functioning. Okay, that was how we started. Optimal human functioning when it comes to running or even walking is about form, not footwear. If you walk or run with, quote, bad form, you'll know. In fact, my first barefoot run, really quick story. I got back into sprinting after a 30-year break when I was 45, so 17 years ago. I was getting injured constantly for the next couple of years. And a friend who's a world champion runner said, try running barefoot, see what you learn. And when you run barefoot, good form feels good, bad form hurts. And I was getting some, it hurts, because I had a form problem that I couldn't feel in a regular shoe. And so barefoot, I could feel it. And by paying attention to my gait and changing my gait to find a way that didn't hurt, my injuries went away. I became faster. I've been one of the fastest guys in my age group in America for the last 15 years. So it's about form. So what is bad form? Bad form is when you reach way out and let your foot lands in front of you, typically on your heel, and typically with your leg relatively outstretched. Now, most people think about this when they're running, but we'll come back to that, to walking in a second. So when you're running and you land with your foot out in front of you, you're putting on the brakes. And that force has to go somewhere. Now, have you ever seen one of the earliest slow motion videos of this big fat circus guy getting a cannonball to the stomach?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, look it up. Just look up, fat guy, cannonball to the stomach. Basically, they shoot a cannonball at this big fat guy, and there's a difference between pressure and force. By the way, I've been teaching physics since I was 14. So the pressure you see when the cannonball hits him, the pressure is handled by the fact that he kind of bends a little bit, and you can see the ripples of his fat kind of, extending out from where the cannonball hits, like a ball dropping into some water. The force, though, the force of this roughly 25-pound cannonball sends this 350-pound guy, flying back 10 feet. So when you have shoes with a bunch of cushioning, the pressure gets spread out so you don't feel it in your feet. But the force has to go somewhere. And if your leg is relatively straight, it's going to your ankle, your knee, your hip, and your back. Whichever one is the weakest is going to be the one that is having problems. Proper form is when you land with your feet mostly as close to under your center of mass as possible. It just so happens when you do that, you're going to land typically on your midfoot or your forefoot. And your foot is designed to be the first place where you can absorb force. I mean, look, as a sprinter, when I hit the ground, I weigh 145 pounds. When I hit the ground on the ball of my foot sprinting, I'm applying between 7 and 1,000 pounds of force into my body. Your feet can handle that stuff. Totally doable. I mean, you can do a bunch of experiments for that. But suffice it to say, the key thing is just not having that braking force and not just landing on your heel, where if you land on your heel, by the time your foot comes flat down to the ground, the plantar fascia and the muscles and tendons in your foot are fully extended, which is putting them in a weak position when they're trying to be strong, which puts strain on them and can lead to things like plantar fasciitis.
But there are two things there, I guess. One is just the injuries that are caused because the sole of the shoe is thin and you might step on a stone. It's not because of the sole of the shoe. What if you step on a stone or something uncomfortable and you cause an injury that way? Surely the cushioning helps in that environment.
Not so much. Not as much as you think, frankly. Because what the cushioning, two things. First of all, I love what you just did, because when people, I know you're hip to barefoot shoes, so you don't have this idea. But when you present some counterfactual idea to somebody, some contrarian idea to someone, if they're really attached to the idea, well, I need all that cushioning in my shoes for whatever reason, they will come up with the most extreme stories of why you would need cushioning that are things that so rarely happen. What we're asking you to do is get out of cushioned shoes, not close your eyes when you run.
Yeah, because they'll likely say something like, "Oh, but what about the needles full of heroin that I might have?"
Yeah, what if look? I here's again, we can't violate the laws of physics. We have had in the last 14 years 3 or 4 people say that they were out in the desert and they stepped on a cactus needle and it went through the rubber in their shoe. Didn't cause any problem, but it went through. That's because physics. You take a a needle and you shoot it at the right angle at the right speed, you can penetrate steel. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I had my teeth cleaned, and now the dentists are using these water jets to clean things. And it was freaking me out a little because I remember a while ago researching water jet cutting machines where they use streams of water to cut through steel. Okay, so physics is physics. But the real question is, how often does something like that happen? And the answer is very, very infrequently. My favorite, when you talk about running barefoot, like truly barefoot, people go, what if you step in dog crap? I go, when's the last time you stepped in dog crap? And they go, I don't know, 20 years ago? I think, why are you going to start doing it now? So, you keep your eyes open, you pay attention. And I will say this about stepping on seemingly unpleasant things. When I first started doing this, we had a lot of gravel in our driveway, and it was unpleasant to walk on it. And mostly, it's hard to describe, not even that it was really physically unpleasant. It was neurologically unpleasant because I hadn't been stimulating my feet for so long. My brain is going, whoa, what the hell? By the end of, 6 months or so, not only, I hadn't gotten numb, my feet had gotten more flexible and more responsive. And by not putting my foot way out in front of me and overweighting it, basically putting my weight on that foot before I had checked out the surface, I was able to step a little more delicately on things. And if I stepped on something and it became unpleasant, I was able to step off of it really quickly, which brings me back to walking and walking form. It's the same thing as running form. If you've been in a shoe that elevates your heel, if you have to try this, if you stand up and lift up your heels off the ground a little bit, or lift up one heel off the ground and try to drive the other foot backwards. Okay. So you're doing hip extension. You're taking your heel that's not on the ground backwards. You'll find that it has less range of motion than if your foot is flat on the ground and you drive your heel back. Now, your glutes and your hamstrings are what are supposed to move you forward when you're walking. So if you're in a higher heeled shoe, you really can't drive that other heel back to move you forward. The writer David Sedaris has a great story about this. He's an American guy. He's been living in Paris. And he says, or maybe somewhere else in France, not in Paris, I can't remember. But he says, my French friends say, you walk like an American. And he said, what does that mean? They said, you throw your legs in front of you. If your heel is elevated, really the only way you can get your leg in front of you easily is by kind of throwing it in front of you, instead of using the grounded leg to drive your foot, to drive you forward by pushing back, where your front leg doesn't have to do anything. It'll just catch you and land under your center of mass. And then you lather, rinse, and repeat. So even walking is impacted by footwear.
But if people typically have bad form, and this is 99% of people, because most people aren't barefoot converts, and I had to go down quite a rabbit hole before I ended up committing to barefoot shoes to find out, what's the science behind it. And we can get onto that juxtaposition between, behind not caring about the science of cushioned shoes and really caring about the science of barefoot shoes, which is kind of a strange juxtaposition in a way. But most people have this bad walking form, bad running form. I transitioned quite easily because I walk around the house a lot barefoot. And so that for me wasn't so difficult. I work remotely as well. So most of the time I'm actually out of shoes. But for people who already have developed this poor form, is it actually safe for them to then go into, there are a lot of claims about what barefoot shoes can do, and a lot of research behind it. But there are potentially dangers of just rushing into the process, right?
Well, so I'll do this in a couple of different ways. First of all, great question. Let's say you're a runner in a quote regular shoe and you have a race coming up. Everyone knows the dumbest thing you can do is to switch to a new shoe, even the same model that you've been wearing right before the race. Because when you wear a shoe, you break it in, it breaks you in, you get used to it. The new shoe has different geometry, different tension, different flex points, etc. It's the same thing. If you haven't been to the gym in a year, you don't go back to the gym and do the same workout you did a year ago. You go back and you switch to an embarrassingly small amount of weight. You do an embarrassingly small amount of sets and reps. You go home, you're annoyed that you're incredibly sore from doing that small amount of weight and a small number of reps, and you build up slowly. It's the same thing here. The way that so my undergraduate research was in cognitive aspects of motor skill acquisition. And the way you learn any new skill, and that's what we're talking about, is slowly and with real-time feedback. So you want to start slow. I recommend to people who are just standing on their feet all day, try it for an hour, see how you feel the next day. If you feel a little muscular sore, cool. Just like going to the gym, you just got a little sore. Wait till you feel better, go back and do it again. When you can do an hour fine, add a half an hour, et cetera, until you're feeling fine doing that. If you're walking, walk for 20 minutes. Pay attention to how it feels. Again, good form feels good. Bad form hurts. The easiest way when you're walking to have better form, stand up straight, lean forward from your ankles a tiny bit, and you're going to feel that it's kind of making you want to fall forward a little. Yeah, just kind of go with that. Don't kick your feet out in front of you. Just let that little bit of falling kind of let you feel what it can be like to not have to use so much effort. And again, build up slowly. Do 20 minutes. When that feels good, add another 10, et cetera, until you're fine. If you're running, go out for a really short run, 20 seconds, and see how it feels. If again, you feel a little muscular sore the next day, that's okay. But one of the misunderstandings about transitioning to minimalist footwear is it's all about building up more strength. That will happen, but you're actually working on doing two things, or maybe more than two, but two that popped in my mind. One is learning to relax more, learning to use less effort. The other is reminding your brain that your Achilles can stretch and release tension better than you've been doing. If you're in a higher heeled shoe, you can't fully stretch your Achilles, the greatest spring in your body. And if you can't fully stretch it after a while, your brain goes, oh, that's as far as you can move? Okay, that's as far as we're going to go. I see this in my neighborhood with world champion runners who they land on their midfoot when they're running, and they're in a big high heeled shoe. And they're not even letting their heel come all the way down to the ground in the high-heeled shoe. They've trained their brain to only let their Achilles stretch a certain amount. And so you have to remind your brain that, oh, it's safe to actually use your Achilles fully. There's a whole bodywork style based on this called Feldenkrais method, which is basically doing these little tricks to fake your brain into forgetting that you have limited range of motion. So one example, I saw a Feldenkrais practitioner years ago. As an ex-gymnast, I had whacked out shoulders. And so I had some tension in my shoulder. And he's like, yeah, it's not about your shoulder. It's actually about your lat. And did a weird movement thing where suddenly my ability to reach over my head extended by like a foot because it just made my brain go, oh, you can relax your lats. You don't need to pull so hard. And then my shoulder pain went away. So we're wired, especially after we've had an injury, to restrict our range of motion to heal from the injury. And often we'll keep that restricted range of motion because your brain has learned that's safe. So larger ranges of motion are still safe. You just have to slowly get there. So there's no fixed amount of time that it'll take for someone to make this transition. Secondly, I'm not saying to switch all to barefoot shoes. There's a time and a place. So barefoot shoes are great for, like we talked about, building strength. Building strength is directly correlated with injury reduction. Dr. Isabel Sacco had runners in regular shoes do an 8-week foot exercise program. And then half of them did. The control group did not. The half that did the 8-week exercise program, over the course of the year-long study, had 250% fewer injuries than the ones who didn't do the exercise program. So wear whatever shoe you want. If you're running, for example, switch to something barefoot for active recovery and building strength that will make you more resilient and, according to the study, make you less likely to be injured. Same thing if you're in the gym, same thing if you're walking around, whatever it is. So you don't need to, go cold turkey. But you will probably find, especially with the wider foot-shaped toe box in a truly barefoot shoe, it's so much more comfortable that after a while you're going to go, okay, maybe I'll save those other shoes for race day.
Yeah, I put on my old shoes because they were a bit tatty and I thought I could wear them through the mud. And then I put them on and I wore them. Within about 5 minutes, I just felt so constricted and my toes were grouped up at the end. And it was really quite a horrible sensation.
Yeah.
So it was quite weird. Barefoot shoes sort of ruined me from being able to buy any standard shoes from a normal shop, which is
a funny thing
annoying.
There's a friend of mine, Dr. Emily Splickle. She's a surgical podiatrist. And years ago, she had an e-course. I think it was called Catwalk Confidential. It was basically how to walk in high heels. But it wasn't. It was a foot strengthening program. The idea being that if you get your feet stronger, if you get your body stronger, your ankles, your hips, your knee, your back, then you can tolerate wearing high heels for a little while. What makes it difficult is when, from wearing something that doesn't let your feet bend, move, flex, and feel, you get progressively weaker and less able to handle things over time. So if you get strong enough, you can put up with things being unpleasant for a little while, and then you stop doing things that are unpleasant, because why bother?
Is it fair to say then that barefoot shoes, I mean, when I was researching them before I bought them, so I've been wearing them for about a year now, I saw a lot of reviews, people saying, oh, it eliminated my back pain, or my knee pain has been solved, or, you know, all of these incredible things, which I think are starting to develop in me a year later. You know, it's taken a long time for me to sort of reap the rewards, I think, but they are coming. But is it fair to say that you have to be very intentional about how you transition? It's not a case that the barefoot shoes alone make those dramatic differences. You can't just put them on and hope that all of those things, this misalignments you talk about, start to align themselves. You actually have to do exercises. You have to practice your feet, allow your feet to sort of adapt. Or can you allow the barefoot shoes to do it all?
Yeah. You know, what's funny, nobody would have this conversation if we just talked about getting out of your shoes. If we just said go barefoot, most of these conversations would be completely moot. So let's just think of it that way. Again, because we're wired after 50 years of footwear advertising / propaganda to think that, oh, it's the shoes that are solution. It's your body that's the solution. So the answer to your question is, this is a kind of a debate that I have with a couple of the researchers, where they think you need to do a bunch of exercises, you need to do a bunch of walking before you do anything else. And I go, whatever you do, you just need to start small and listen to the feedback that you get from your body when you're either moving, because that's the most important thing. The way you make changes to your posture, to your form, or even within a sport, is you have to listen and kind of do things slowly in doses. So we forget when you're learning some new movement thing, whether you're playing tennis or golf or whatever, it'll be really frustrating at first. And we misunderstand what frustrating is. Frustrating is your brain saying, I don't have a neural pathway for that. So I got to lay down a new neural pathway, and that's energy intensive, and that's not good for survival. Because spending time learning some new thing in your brain way back when meant you weren't paying attention to whether that thing that was moving the grass weirdly is going to eat you or not. So frustration is just the sign of laying down new neural pathways when you're working on a new movement pattern. And we forget that when those pathways get created is not when we're doing the new activity. It's in the resting period before we do it again some number of days later. So it's really, again, just taking your time to let it change naturally. Some people, so I have a neurological theory about people making the transition. If I gave you instructions on how to run barefoot, I would say take off your shoes, find a really smooth, hard surface, because you're going to get the most feedback. You don't have to worry about what you're stepping on or stepping in. Go for a 20-second run, and if it hurts, do something different till you're having fun. Some people, I'll get mildly technical, their brain map has so de-differentiated. In other words, if they haven't been giving their brain stimulation from the soles of their feet, that part of their brain that would receive that stimulation is going, oh, you're not going to give me the info. I'll stop paying attention because why waste the energy? So for some people, that connection has so been muted that they literally can't feel if it hurts. I've seen people go for a short barefoot run, have bad form, rip up the bottom of their feet and not even know it. So and unfortunately, there's no good self-diagnostic for what I'm about to describe, but this could work for everybody anyway. What these people need to do is just go walk around on mildly unpleasant surfaces, pea gravel, even grass, or certain sidewalks, just to wake up that neural pathway again. Second group of people, they can tell if it hurts, but they don't have great proprioceptive skill. And proprioception is just knowing where your joints are in space and how they align, etc. It's not what you feel from the ground. It's how your body's positioned. And I know this because people would say to me, hey, there's something wrong with the sole material of your shoes because I'm wearing out the heel. And I said, oh, that's because you're overstriding, foot out in front of you, and you're landing on your heel striking. And they have said, I don't think so. I go, send me a video. And I've literally had people send me a video where I've had to spend 20 minutes in slow motion drawing lines on the screen to show that they're overstriding. And they have literally said to me, yeah, but I don't do that. I go, dude, it's a video that you made of you. It's
This is you.
Yeah. So, I'm not trying to single people out. We all have bad proprioceptive skills. When I was a young gymnast in the compulsory floor X routine, we had to put our arms parallel to the ground. And it took us weeks to learn what parallel to the ground was, because when you look, it doesn't look parallel from your perspective. So what's really helpful in a situation like this is to get video feedback. slow motion video and look and see if what you're doing. See if you're overstriding. See if your ankle is landing in front of your knee is the best way to look at overstriding. If you're watching someone run across the screen, at the first point where your foot touches the ground, if you're landing on your heel in particular, but it doesn't matter if you're landing anywhere on your foot, if your ankle is in front of your knee, you're overstriding.
It was a similar thing happened to me when I was learning how to do handstand push-ups against a wall, not without the wall. I'm not that good yet. But it wasn't until I videoed myself, I saw how much of a banana shape I was in, how I wasn't getting, my shoulders, my head closer up to the ground, all of that sort of stuff. I was really doing these sort of minimal jerks, handstand jerks more than push-ups. Yes, it is humbling to see
quite humbling to watch yourself on video. But it's important because, again, we're not really good we don't have a lot of skill at developing proprioception. So third group of people, they can feel if it hurts. They have decent proprioceptive skills. They need little cues just to think about something that will actually change your form. So one cue, a common one, is think about your feet like they're on a ball and they're barely touching the ground. They're just like, oop, or think like lifting your foot off the ground before it even touches the ground. Or instead of pushing off the ground, think about lifting your foot off the ground the same way that if you stepped on a bee, you wouldn't push off the ground. You'd reflexively flex your hip and pull your foot off the ground. Or a cue that changed my running that came from my friend Doug Adams from Run DNA, and they do gait analysis and gait retraining. He said, when your foot is coming off the ground, I want you to think about kneeing a soccer ball, or in your case, a football, towards somebody in front of you. And it's a weird cue because to knee a ball forward, it's not something that you can initiate after your foot has left the ground. You have to initiate it by the way your foot leaves the ground. So it changes the way you move in this upside down kind of causal effect, which is really, really cool. Or think about Fred Flintstone starting his car. His feet are spinning behind him and they never catch up to him. All of these are little cues just to speed up the learning process. You'd figure it out on your own if you'd pay attention. Anyway, the fourth group of people, they're naturals. They just pick it up right away. The problem they have is they have so much fun. It feels so good. They end up doing too much too soon, getting tired, and slowly reverting to one of those previous levels. So that's the thing. And again, there's no way of self-evaluating which level you're at. So you can start at the bottom and work your way up. Start walking around on mildly unpleasant things. Go get some video of how you're moving. Get some cues from someone who knows how to give you some good cues until you're a natural, and then just don't do too much. Make the transition. If you're running 5 days a week, don't just go straight to 5 days a week. Start with half of one day, then a day and a half, etc. You just want to, take your time. There's no such thing as there's the Couch to 5K programs, which don't work for everyone because everyone's different. Same thing here.
There's so many routes I want to take with this conversation, so I'm going to try to get through everything.
Good luck.
But they're really difficult because you think, it's just about shoes, right? But it's just so much more than that. One thing I want to pick up on.
Here's the thing. It's not, in our case, on the Barefoot side, it's not about shoes at all. It's about your body and optimal human functioning. And let me throw out one other study thing really quickly because it's sort of relevant. Isabel Sacco, again, did some great research where she took elderly women. And I say that, I use the word elderly quite cautiously because some of these women were barely older than I am. But regardless, they all had knee osteoarthritis. And she put them in a very inexpensive minimalist shoe. It wasn't even a great one. Still going to squeeze your toes a little bit. And just said, walk in these. Just, make sure you're in them for at least 6 hours a day. I think it may have been 8 hours. I can't remember. And over the course of time, their reported pain diminished from wherever it was to nothing or next to nothing. The amount of medication they were taking diminished from to almost nothing or next to nothing. And by looking at x-rays, many of them, their arthritis went away. And I said, What changed? She goes, they weren't overstriding and slamming their heels in the ground, which is putting force into the knee joint, which over time created arthritic response. Again, this stuff is just all common sense. Don't let your muscles, ligaments, and tendons do their job as springs, shock absorbers, and joint protectors. And you can't do that when you're landing in a weird position and putting force into your body without using the things that are designed to mitigate that force.
I want to go back to what you were saying about the 4 groups of people, because I feel like I may fit into a 5th category that hasn't been discussed. And that is, left versus right. Now, it kind of makes intuitive sense. Like, so my right arm is stronger than my left arm. I think I've got about half an inch extra on the bicep even though I train them the same.
Yeah.
I walk on both my right and my left foot. I don't do much else other than walking on them. So, quite peculiar that my left foot seems to have struggled with the transition to barefoot shoes a bit more than my right foot, but maybe not that, surprising given the imbalances between right and left often people have, depending on which is their dominant side. But for me, what I found was almost instantaneously on my right side, my right foot could deal with the barefoot shoes, no problem. There was not a single issue. But my left foot, even now, a year later, I sometimes feel like maybe gets a little bit more tired or has a few more issues. And so I think there is a fifth group of people who are amazing on their right and or on their left and not on the other side.
It's really no different. You're just two people in one. So let me back up to my first barefoot story. When I took my first barefoot run, now I'm a sprinter, okay? I run the 100 meters outdoors. I run the 60 meters indoors. I don't take turns on the track because I don't have a GPS watch and I don't like getting lost. I don't think I ever ran more than a mile of my own volition, and I hated everything after the first 150 meters of it. So when I did that first run, I ended up with a blister on the ball of my left foot. And most people would say, oh, see, this is kind of bullshit. I got a blister. My brain went, how come my right foot feels fine? And oh yeah, while I was getting injured all the time prior to that, it was my left leg that got injured more often. It was the second barefoot run when I thought, if I can find a way to run that doesn't hurt the gaping hole that's still in my foot, then I'm probably not doing the thing that caused the gaping hole. And what most people would do is pay attention to the gaping hole and the pain that I had for the first 9 minutes and 30 seconds of what was going to be a 10-minute run. Instead, I paid attention to the good side, the side that was doing it correctly. And again, this is like a Feldenkrais idea. If you have a bad side, work on movement patterns with the good side to kind of remind your brain what good movement patterns are. Then you switch to the other side and you learn more quickly. So 9 minutes and 30 seconds of paying attention to the good side, while I can't say I was immune to feeling the pain on the bad side, suddenly the quote bad side figured it out. And in one stride, I got faster, easier, lighter, more effortless, and more fun. And so it's just a question of awareness. And human beings are pretty good at doing two things. If you keep subjecting yourself to something unpleasant, you'll eventually either stop doing it or tune out. But if you're subjecting yourself to something mildly unpleasant while paying attention to what might be causing it by paying attention to what's doing it right, that often speeds up the learning process. But again, it's different for everyone. And it's a question of what that imbalance is. If it's severe, that's different than if it's mild. Here's my favorite story about that. We have a lot of customers who swear by our shoes, and they said, we couldn't really walk until we got in your shoes. And what makes this unusual is they only have one leg. So when they obviously can't feel anything in the leg that's missing, but they were wearing a big, thick shoe on the leg that was still there, and they couldn't feel anything through that either. So when they switched to a minimalist shoe, they were able to feel with their existing leg, obviously, and it allowed them to change the way they moved with the leg that had a prosthetic. My favorite story is one guy, he said, before I had your shoes, I could spend an hour, maybe 2 hours in my prosthetic. Now, all day, every day, not a problem. It changed his gait in a leg that doesn't exist.
So I've got a friend who has flat feet.
Stop right there. Who gives a shit? Seriously.
Well, he said, I can't make the transition. I love the idea of barefoot shoes.
I'm just going to go out on a limb. He's completely full of shit. Why do I say that? I had comedy level flat feet for 50 years until I started doing this. Actually, 47 years. And I've heard this from hundreds and hundreds of people. I'm not making a medical claim, not making a promise. Flat feet, arch height, predominantly genetic. Arch strength is a question of using it. Here's what he does. This is not complicated. If he can't walk barefoot for 2 steps, good. Just stand barefoot. Just try that. See how that works. If that's unpleasant, sit down. You can find these online. Just search for foot exercises. There's a bunch of stuff you can do just sitting around watching television. Do those for a little while until you can stand up. Stand up until you can walk to the bathroom. Walk to the bathroom until you can walk to wherever you have to walk for, a couple of blocks. There's nothing preventing anyone, except in extreme circumstances, like literal, not issues about musculature, issues where bones are in the wrong place because of some genetic whatever. That's a whole different story. But we're almost never talking about those situations. There's nothing that prevents anyone from getting stronger at any age. There's research that's been done hundreds of times showing that 90-year-olds who engage in resistance training get stronger, build muscle at 90. Not as fast as they did when they were 20, 30, 40.
Is there any condition at all? People wear corrective shoes for all sorts of conditions, but is there any condition at all which will prevent somebody from wearing a barefoot shoe?
Yes, but those people are so few and far between. They know who they are. They are seeing podiatrists every couple of weeks. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's not your, I have flat feet or, I have high arches. It's a medically determined X-ray provable situation that's going on. And that's not what most people are talking about. People like to argue for their limitations. It makes great dinner party conversation. So I can't do that because I'm special. I have flat feet. I used to have flat feet. They're not high arches now. I was at a chiropractic conference, and the guy running it said to the other chiropractors, if you have to pay him $5, pay him $5 so you can feel his feet. Because they're flat, which we normally think we need to correct, but they are freakishly strong, which means he's fine. Again, I'm a nationally ranked sprinter. If you look at a lot of sprinters, flat feet, where's the problem? I can show you a bunch of powerlifters, flat feet, where's the problem? An arch is the strongest architectural structure there is. Roman arches, still around, still doing just fine. An arch, if you put pressure on it from above, gets stronger. You have 3 of those arches in your feet, the longitudinal one from your big toe back to your heel, which is the one most people think of. There's one on the outside as well. There's one across your foot also, the transverse arch. They all, given the opportunity, are stronger under load. And even an arch doesn't have to be a perfect arch, half of a circle. You can have a low arch that still, when it's aligned properly, under stress, is providing additional strength. If it's high arch, same thing. People with high arches, they often have to work on certain kinds of mobility, which isn't just about getting massage. It's literally, again, training your brain to the extent that it's possible to know that you're okay moving. Usually that arch tension is there from some protective thing that you can learn you don't really need to protect from. But again, it's idiosyncratic. It's individual. I don't want to be painting an overarching picture. Suffice it to say, the examples people like to give for why this may not work are usually not them and usually so extreme that we're talking about, a tiny percentage of the population.
If you start off with flat feet and then transition to barefoot shoes, will you see, you mentioned it's obviously genetic, but will you see an arch of some description, even a low one, start to develop, or will it not happen?
So the research hasn't been done on this one. I haven't seen a study that's showing this one yet. I just know anecdotal information, and I'm the first one to say anecdotes do not equal data. But when there's a lot of anecdotal information, it is a data point. And I've just seen this over and over and over. So my foot, again, I had comedy level flat feet. If I stepped out of a pool, it looked like an oval with some dots. And there's a muscle on the inside of the foot, I'm not going to get too technical, so people don't need to pay attention, that extended out. So my foot didn't have a normal shape. There was like a big bump on the inside of each foot. It was just some tissue that was, actually working too hard that wasn't supposed to be. So over time, and it wasn't really that long, I developed an arch. So when I step out of a pool, it looks more like a foot. Not one of those amazing things with a giant gaping hole on the inside, but it looks like a foot shape. And you can see from the side, there's some elevation. And that muscle that was overworked stopped having to work so hard. The entire morphology of my foot has changed. My foot got a little wider. It got a little shorter as the arch got stronger. My toes started spreading. I had a bit of a kind of almost bunion on my left foot, gone. I'm not making promises. I'm just saying this is what's happened to me. My favorite flat-footed story was a husband of someone who worked for us, who after the end of skiing season went and got some brand new custom-made ski boots because they were on sale at the end of the season, and then was wearing our shoes and sandals all summer long. And when ski season came, he put on his boots and they didn't fit. So his foot had changed. He had developed an arch. His feet had gotten a little wider. And luckily, he went to a great ski boot guy here in town who was able to modify them. He didn't have to throw them away. But we hear things, look, even with our existing customers, we hear people saying, my feet have gotten wider since I've been wearing your shoes, and now I'm looking for something even wider. And we're not a big enough company where we can make what we currently do and a small selection of things that are even wider, or we can't just shift the size to being wider for everyone, because then the people with narrower feet wouldn't work in our shoes. So there's a kind of balance for doing the right thing.
Another reason I think I transitioned quite easily was something I discovered when I was researching. I did a lot of research into how to choose the right size for your feet. And most people were saying, whatever size you typically wear in normal shoes, get that or a size up. And so that's what I did. I went for a size up. But actually what I discovered was, to keep my feet comfortable, I'd been wearing a size up in normal shoes from what the Barefoot was. So I'm a size 9 in a normal pair of shoes.
Yep.
But actually in Barefoot shoes, I needed to be a size 8 because I was defaulting to something which was more comfortable and had more space for my toes anyway.
Very common. There's an Olympic runner friend of mine who was always buying shoes a size and a half larger to accommodate his wider foot. And then he came back down a size and a half in ours. So here's the mythology about footwear sizing. I love it when people say to me, well, I'm a true size 9. And I go, there's no such thing. They're like, what? I said, well, footwear sizing is a couple things. Length, the length of the shoe that you get is highly dependent on your personal preference and mythology. So I wish I had a regular shoe with me, a quote normal shoe, because this idea that you need a certain amount of space in front of your toes came from the fact that when you have a thicker sole, when the shoe bends when you're walking or running, like when you bend a really thick book, the inside bends faster than the outside. So as you're walking with a shoe with a thicker sole, the inside's bending faster. It's effectively shortening. This is why you see people who, they finish a race, and for a number of reasons, they have blackened toenails, or the toenails, come off. So people have learned, I need a certain amount of space in front of my toes to accommodate that effective shortening that's occurred. Well, with a minimalist shoe, there is no big, thick sole, so that shortening doesn't happen. So it's personal preference. I wear my shoes with my toes really close to the front edge because I like it that way. It lets me know, especially when I'm sprinting, if I'm doing any sort of overstriding and putting the brakes on and making my foot move forward a little bit. And this will sound creepy. It also lets me know when it's time to cut my toenails. So
I get that too.
But the other thing about sizing is that people will say, well, I'm a fill-in-the-blank width. Will your shoe fit me? And I say, how the hell do I know? They go, what do you mean? I go, well, your foot is 3-dimensional. The width measurement you just gave me is 2-dimensional. So you can have a narrow foot 2-dimensionally that's large from a volumetric perspective and not fit into a wide shoe. You can have a wide foot 2-dimensionally that's low volume 3-dimensionally and fit into a shoe that you think is going to be too tight. So volume is the key, not some 2-dimensional thing. And unfortunately, there's no way to know what that is. And it's different with different shoe construction. If you have a shoe like this one that has a tongue, you can open it up much more than if it's a shoe that's like a slip-on that is a dead fit, is what they call it. But it's also different if the shoe is leather, or if the shoe is canvas, or if the shoe is hemp canvas, or if the shoe has welded components. I mean, there's all these things that affect the 3-dimensionality of the footwear that will impact how it feels on your foot.
I really wish I'd had this conversation before I did all my research a year ago, because
well, that's why we're doing it now, out of the goodness of your heart, to spare people the pain that you went through.
Exactly. I'm glad we're giving people this information because, I read everything from there should be an 8mm gap from your toe to the edge of your shoe. There should be, you can have up to a 20mm
Mythology.
Gap. And it was quite overwhelming because I couldn't find an actual answer. And when it came down to it, the pair of shoes I have now, I think there might be a 4, maybe 5mm gap. And I thought, oh no, I've got it wrong again, but it feels right. And in the end, I decided to go with my gut. What felt right, I was going to stick with. And I'm really happy I did because, as you said, it's all personal preference.
Yeah. And the only problem with that theory is about does it feel right has to do not with our shoes, but with normal shoes. Because people will step on something with a bunch of foam and cushioning and go, oh my God, that feels great. Well, yeah, cushioning feels good. But if you just if you're lying on a memory foam mattress, it feels great. Lie there long enough and you get so weak you can't get out of bed. Or you can't feel something that's underneath you, Princess and the Pea. Or, there are times where how something feels is not great. Here's my other favorite one, though. I actually want to do a little TikTok video about this. My favorite thing is when someone says to me, well, people are setting records in those new super shoes. I should get some of those. To which I say, are you a 105-pound Kenyan who plans to run that marathon in 2 hours and 10 minutes? And they're like, what? No. I'm like, what? I go, well, that's what those shoes are made for. So any kind of cushioning is effectively tuned to a particular weight and speed. If you're not that weight running at that speed, it'll mess you up. And if you are that weight and you are that speed, then you're wearing that shoe mostly because the guy next to you is also wearing it. And you want to make sure that, there's no imagined competitive advantage. But those shoes are not made for normal human beings. In fact, in the early days, one brand, I will mention it by name, a bunch of Olympians that I was training with, they started wearing Hokas. And they're saying, this feels great. I'm getting more miles in. It's wonderful. And I'm watching them and I said, you're going to be done running in like 2.5 years. They went, what are you talking about, man? I'm an Olympian. I went, yeah. So what's happening is you can't feel the force that's going into your knees with all that cushioning, and you're going to be done running in a couple of years. And they thought I was crazy. 2 years later, they became cyclists.
I was going to bring this up because I was going to say, haven't we got this incredible advancement in shoe technology to thank for all of these amazing world records that we're setting time and time again? The fact that sprinters are getting faster and faster.
No, they're not.
Time.
No, they're not. Sprinters are not getting faster. Seriously. So I'm going to say this about sprinting that cracks me up. I was in Berlin when Usain Bolt set the world record at 9.58. No one has come within 0.2 of a second of that, I think, in the last, since then, 15 years ago. What's going on? So sprinting times barely creeping. And the idea that it's coming from footwear, the research is showing that it's mostly coming from the track surface, not from the footwear. Changes in the track surface. Some research has shown that Jesse Owens, because of just looking at his joint mechanics, would be barely slower than Usain Bolt. But he was running on a cinder track surface. Here's an even better one. Delano Merriweather, who is an amazing physician, he set the world record, stands to this day, in the 100-yard dash. He set it in 1971. Now, it stands to this day because after he did that race, they switched everything to meters instead of yards. So they stopped running the 100 yards. But he ran a 9 flat 100 yards. If you do the math on that, that means he would have run about a 9,800 meters, which would have made him one of the fastest men in the world today.
Wow.
Sprinting times have not gotten faster because of shoes. He was wearing a shoe that, frankly, looked a lot more like ours with some spikes on it. They were flexible, they were thin, still a little pointy. But, if he was running today on a regular track surface, even in my shoes, I compete and train in the same shoe, no better than a sprinting spike. I bet he'd be running in, like a 9.7. He'd be the fastest man in the world. Could
Usain Bolt have set his record in barefoot shoes?
Absolutely. A sprinting spike is pretty close to a barefoot shoe. It's just the stiffness of the sole, the spike plate that people say acts like a spring, does not act like a spring. It's stiff basically so you can get more force into the ground without the force being absorbed by the cushioning. All foam sucks energy out of the system. Doesn't matter what kind of foam it is. It removes energy from the system. End of story. So there's a guy named Phil Maffetone, Dr. Phil Maffetone, who wrote a book called 159, which is his idea about what it would take for someone to run a legitimate marathon in under 2 hours. And he says they should be barefoot on a smooth, clean, straight, flat surface. Ron Hill ran in bare feet in an Olympic race, and someone asked why. He said it was the lightest shoe I could find. Zola Budd I think she ran the 10K, I can never remember, barefoot. Why? It was just easier for her that way. She grew up running that way. It felt better. I know a lot of runners who came from third world countries who ran barefoot and never had an injury until they got sponsored by a major shoe company. So yeah, there's no question. The people say, well, then why don't they do it? I go, because the quote barefoot companies, we don't have the money that it takes to sponsor them from a young age, because I would never take an Olympian right now and suggest that you should stop doing what you're doing at your highest earning potential and try something different. I mean, if this is what you do for a living, don't risk that. Don't be an idiot. If there's a reason to try it out, then let's talk. And we have athletes in other sports who are doing barefoot training all over the place. Venus Williams, in a Wall Street Journal article just last month, said, someone asked, what's changed in your training as you've gotten older? Oh, it's all about, foot strength now. I'm doing all this work on building up foot strength. We have basketball players on a number of teams who are wearing our shoes when they're training. Football players who are wearing our shoes when they're training and just walking around. One in particular said, you gave me an extra 3 years in my career. I mean, I had foot, ankle, hip, and knee problems until I started wearing your shoes. I'm now one of the older players in the league. I'm totally fine. So we're seeing it just spreading into the places where this goes back to what I was saying. You don't need to make the switch full time, but people are starting to realize foot strength is critical. One way you build foot strength, using your feet. You can do that in a shoe like ours when you're not on the field, not on the court, not on the track. We have Olympic ice hockey players who say they're skating better than ever because as soon as they get out of their skates, they're in our shoes and they're saying, I can feel it because my ankles have gotten better. So I'm accelerating better and I'm jumping better, which they didn't have when their feet got weak in the shoe and then stayed weak in a big supportive shoe afterwards.
Now, you've mentioned the money, the finances that the big shoe companies have to sponsor runners, but also you mentioned the word propaganda a little earlier.
Yeah.
Is there and has there been a propaganda campaign for normal shoes? And when do you see that having begun?
The day that Nike started making a shoe with an elevated heel with a wedge of cushioning. I mean, bottom line. If you look at the first Nike waffle trainer, it was basically a minimalist shoe. It was only about 10 millimeters of foam. It was basically flat. It was a little pointy still. And it did a really clever thing where the shoe was flat, but the sole at the front tapered. So I was like, 10, 11 years old when I first got in one of those. And I leaned forward to start running and it put me on my toes right away. It's like, this is how I run. It was amazing. But it was once they started doing an elevated heel that the propaganda began. And here's an example of the propaganda. I mean, again, well, let's just back up to Nike. I don't want to single them out, but it's so easy. Promoting the new shoe thing as, and I forgot another point about that. 52% reduction in injury rates, but nobody would be happy with a 14.5% injury rate within 12 weeks. So what's up with that? So that's propaganda, is getting all the press to say 52% reduction in injury, which raises the question, if that new shoe is so much better than the old shoe, why are you still selling that old piece of crap? Why don't you make all shoes like the new one? To this day, they only make 2 shoes with that lack of protective features that is proven to reduce injury. Like, what's up with that?
But we've been wearing constrictive shoes for a lot longer, but before Nike introduced the elevated heel, right?
Not a lot longer. Not a lot. Because what shoes were, for quite a long time, you'd get shoes and they were custom made in some way. Or look, if in the early days where you were getting leather shoes, it was pretty common. If they were tight, you went somewhere to a cobbler who would stretch them so they fit your feet better. Or, people just dealt with the fact that it squeezed their toes and gave them bunions and that became normal. Like once enough people are doing something stupid, everyone starts doing something stupid. So the fact that we were doing something stupid in the past is not justification for doing something stupid.
But I used to wear winkle pickers,
What
they're
hell?
really constrict your toes. And then you see women's footwear, which, invariably they're walking around the house for months trying to stretch them and trying to break them in. And even still, they give them blisters. So Nike can't have been responsible for what happened next, right? For all of this footwear to be so detrimental.
Yeah, no, it's a race to be stupid, in my opinion. So here's an example. Well, first of all, it's stupid in different ways. So there was an event it's a trade show called the Running Event last December. The shoes are getting even taller and even lighter, and they're made so that you can only wear them for one race. It's like they're going to fall apart at the end of one marathon. They cost $500 a pair. People who can't run a marathon are buying these shoes, thinking it's going to make them better. There's a research physical therapist named Dr. Jay DeSherry who said they may make you faster, but they're also changing your gait and the way you're using your muscles in a way that will undeniably injure you. So, there's I don't even want to call it a trade-off. It's a bad idea, especially if you want to run and be healthy for as much of your life as humanly possible.
Something I want to touch on as well, though, is that I announced my bias at the start of this conversation because I was a convert. I'm into health and fitness. I'm into all of this sort of stuff. So it was kind of natural for me to eventually find this niche, but very much growing community. Is there an element of placebo in here where people who are already interested in optimizing their health in some way gravitate to wearing barefoot shoes, and then because they're already compelled to do something like that, they begin to see and feel the benefits as a result, partly of placebo? Or do you think there are people who have had their minds changed completely on this subject who weren't necessarily interested in this kind of field and this genre?
It's the latter. The former kind of was, so in 2009, 2010, when the whole barefoot boom kicked off, there was a big spike in interest. And then it dropped by about 2012, 13, and then was kind of flat for a number of years. Those were the diehards. Those were the people going, hey, I heard this is good. I'm curious. I'm whatever. But my simple proof to answer your question that it's the latter is the number of kids who get into our shoes and parents are saying they only want to wear your shoes. They'll never wear anything else. And parents of those healthy-minded people who are elderly people. I mean, my favorite is when I hear from some customer who says, I finally got my parents into them and they'll never wear anything else. And I mean, we have, people who are literally over 90 years old who are wearing our shoes and just like put them on. My favorite, actually, one of our employees, he got his dad to wear our shoes right away, but his mom was convinced she couldn't. And after like 3 years of hearing, dad going, I don't know, these things are great, she put them on, and literally in 30 seconds, she said, why didn't you tell me they were so comfortable? So what we see is the interest is growing across the board. There's the health and fitness minded people. There's the professional athletes. There's the little kids. There's the old people. We're starting to see it on the fashion circuit, and that's been happening for a while. So we are seeing. There's not one audience that I can think of where we're not seeing more and more people getting hip to this idea. Because again, if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, it just makes sense. Stronger is better than weaker. Feeling is better than numbness. Freedom is better than restriction. Proper posture is better than improper posture. You just look at a normal shoe and it just doesn't make sense unless you're telling yourself a story that a shoe company has sold you on.
Yeah, actually, I bought my 4-year-old, well, she was 3 at the time, barefoot shoes, and she asked to wear them constantly. They've not been the best for winter because they were more of a summer shoe, but she absolutely loved wearing them. So I can attest to that kids, or at least my kid, really gravitated towards it when I bought them for her. What do you think the future is then? Because right now, as I mentioned earlier, we've got this dichotomy where people will argue to the cows come home that barefoot shoes aren't right, and they'll like I did, they'll look into the science, they'll try and convince themselves, but they won't argue against what is the status quo. They won't say, Correct. Actually, what's the science behind Correct. Cushioned shoes? They don't have that sort of ability to.
No, they have the ability. They don't have the curiosity, because we've been hearing this story for 50 years. You tell a story often enough, regardless of whether it's true. The veracity is irrelevant. If you hear it long enough, it becomes the truth. When it's passed down from generation to generation, it becomes common knowledge. It's just not true. And so, yes, people are less likely to question their beliefs. This is just human beings. We're like that. We're wired to get beliefs because those things are designed to save us, and we're not wired to question them because that, again, the time that it takes to question them, that's when you could get eaten by something. So what's happening is the conversation is just happening more often. So I have a book literally in front of me called Change, and it's just research on network effects and what creates societal change. And the basic premise is you need small groups of people who start adopting something, usually the thought leaders in those groups. And once within that group you hit 25% adoption, that's when it'll spike to 70%. And we're starting to, and then when enough small groups have it, that's when it becomes a cultural thing. And that can take, different amounts of time depending on how those groups interact, what the communication methods are, et cetera. But that's what seems to be happening. And it's never going to be like, quote, barefoot stuff takes over the world, but we are going to see I believe, a significant lift in awareness first. And what sells our product is not the information. You can't convince people of something with data, as you may have discovered. And there's examples of that anywhere you look in the newspaper today. But what really convinces people is the experience. And so my goal is to find as many interesting ways as possible to give enough people the experience that it spreads the idea to other people who then want to try and have the experience. And when people have it, look, we're not going to bat 100% or bat 1,000. We're not going to be 100%. We don't have to be. No one is about anything. But when what we see, the return rate on our product is so much lower than for any other footwear brand I know, except a couple of other minimalist companies. And it's because the experience, like, oh my God, I'm not squeezing my toes together. Brilliant. That alone can sell the product. Oh, I'm not messing with my posture. That alone can sell the product. Oh, I can actually feel the ground and respond to it. That alone can sell the product. Get all 2 or 3 of those and you got a convert. So, half of our orders come from existing customers. That's not an accident. So what I see, the way things tend to grow, back to the book Change, is you get that kind of organic thing among smaller groups, then you hit a certain critical mass and it pops. And I think that's what's going to happen. I know the major shoe companies know that what we're doing is legit. They have said it directly to people that we know, that they've said, this minimalist thing is for real. But if we did it, this is a quote, by the way, if we did it, we'd be admitting we've been lying for 50 years. Admitting
that's a
we've
quote.
been lying for 50 years. They know it.
I've got to say one thing my wife wanted me to bring up was she said I would try barefoot shoes if they looked better. So the fashion side of things is, a lot of people do say this, absolutely, and I personally think they look good, but a lot of people do have a problem with the fashion.
Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I've heard people argue over the same shoe. I think it's beautiful. I think it's hideous. B, look at the new stuff we're coming out with. And continue to watch the new stuff we're coming out with. I will admit, and I'll be the first to admit, what started this whole barefoot thing was a bunch of crazy ultra runners. And there's more of those that were men than women. And so the initial push was men's shoes because it was more men buying the product. Our first product was actually a do-it-yourself sandal making kit. More women buying that one, actually, because they could do all these really fun, cool things with it. They could do lacing styles and put beads on them, do stuff. We still sell that, by the way. But what's been very satisfying for us in the last few years is we've released more casual shoes that are becoming some of our best sellers and more women's casual shoes, which are becoming some of our best sellers. So tell her, go look at our website and see what she thinks. If she has feedback, go to xeroshoes.com/feedback and let us know, what you're looking for, because it's not like we're not developing new stuff. We're always making new things. And what's driven our product line expansion, we have more different types of products: shoes, boots, and sandals, winter, summer, spring, fall, men, women, etc., than any other brand. And what's driving it primarily is our customers saying, oh my God, I love this, but I also like this, or I need this. And plus, us having experience in the industry, knowing how to expand the family of products in a way that makes it more available to more people.
Great. I will have a chat with her.
Look, we are small companies. Small from the perspective of footwear. If I give you the number, people will go, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But from a footwear perspective, you're nothing until you're $500 million. So, and we are not $500 million. So it takes time. You can't just make everything all at once unless you want to go bankrupt in 2 years. So, we're getting there.
I'm going to pivot slightly. It might seem like a very sharp pivot, but there's just a few more questions I really wanted to get through. One is about just being barefoot. Now, you've obviously mentioned, you can just go barefoot, right? And that's going to give you all the same benefits. It doesn't give you that protective layer. So like, say you're walking on tarmac, for instance, you want to avoid hurting yourself or whatever the case might be. Where do you stand on just spending more time barefoot and also the albeit mixed literature around grounding or earthing?
Oh boy. Okay. So, wow. You just decided to really open up smack a hornet's nest. I'm a big fan of barefoot. I spend most of my time barefoot. I'm well known for doing that in my neighborhood. I was in a store recently. So I'm in the pharmacy line at Costco. When I wear shoes, I wear mismatched colors. And there's a guy behind me in the pharmacy line. He goes, "Hey, your shoes don't match." And the pharmacist, without even looking up, says, "He's wearing shoes." So they know me. And I stopped spending, what made me start Xero Shoes was I was spending all this time barefoot, and my wife was getting sick of me walking into our white carpeted house with my dirty bare feet. And I got tired of arguing with stores and restaurants about whether it was legal to go in bare feet. It is. They can have a policy, but it's not illegal. So anyway, I'm a big fan of being in bare feet. When you come home, take off your shoes. Go around barefoot in your house, walking around your neighborhood. Just as much time as you can spend barefoot, the more time you can spend barefoot, the better, arguably.
Socks okay, or take the socks off?
If it's a really thin sock, that's okay. If it's a thick sock, again, you're muting the feedback you're getting. You're probably squeezing your toes together. The reason we don't sell regular socks on our website is I haven't found a company that can make one that doesn't squeeze your toes together. And frankly, the minimum order quantity for socks is so large that it's a tricky investment for us to make. Okay, on to grounding. Where to begin? I think that answer just said it right there, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
It's a great story. We love good stories. We love simple stories. If you know anything about chemistry, biology, or physics, the story falls apart. For people who don't know what it is, the premise is that the problems we're having is being disconnected electrically from the Earth. There's these, quote, free electrons that are running around the Earth, and they should go into your body. That'll neutralize free radicals, cure inflammation, and then you'll be great. To the point you made before, people don't like to question their beliefs. It takes a lot of effort. And most of the time, we don't have the expertise to even do that correctly. So let me give you a simpler story than grounding. In the very early days of humans, where we were able to feel things underneath our feet and feel how our feet respond to the things we're on, we got really good at knowing, oh, this is a good surface because it means nearby there's something like water or food or an easy way to get to water or food. We know that being in nature has beneficial effects, in part because of just being around a bunch of vegetation where there's more oxygen. Or, there's a lot of research. The Japanese came up with the idea of nature bathing. They came up with that term. And the good feeling is a neurological phenomenon that reduces stress. Feeling something good under your feet can feel really good and can reduce stress. We know reducing stress can reduce inflammation, can be beneficial for health. That's a simple story. The more complicated story falls apart if you know anything about science. So, for one example, two things. One thing that people say is, well, the problem is now we're wearing rubber shoes. It used to be leather shoes, and that was okay. Because people don't remember that in the early days of electronics, leather was used as an insulator. Leather does not let electrons move through it until it's so soaking wet that it becomes useless. And then it's not the leather, it's the water.
Yeah.
Okay, so ignoring that for a second. People will show, oh, you got a positive charge on your skin. That's got to be bad. Well, your skin is designed to be highly resistant to letting electricity go through it, which electricity is electrons, which is why 99.5% of people who get struck by lightning survive. The current goes around their body into the ground. 100% of trees that get struck by lightning explode and burst into flames because the electricity goes through the tree, into the cells, superheats the water, turns it into steam, blows up. Counterfactual number 2. Just being grounded is better for your health. Tell it to the pets who spend a lot of time out being grounded, who still get cancer and other forms of diseases. Tell it to people living in third world countries where they spend a lot of time barefoot and still end up with various diseases that aren't coming from microbial things that are penetrating the skin. But, look, we all get sick. Sharks get cancer. Okay? If you want to be grounded, you're in a giant body of water. But fish get cancers. Fish get other inflammatory diseases. Corals get it too. Okay, but now let's look at it piece by piece. So the basic premise is these electrons penetrate your skin, but the skin is again impervious to electricity going through it. If it's just about getting electricity into your body, suck on a 9-volt battery. But that doesn't work because this idea that when these electrons come in, they neutralize free radicals. By the way, I know I'm pissing people off when I do this, but here we go. Free radicals are neutralized by ions, electrically charged molecules, not by electrons on their own. Because if it was just electrons, again, suck on a battery. By the way, your immune system functions by utilizing free radicals. So, if you neutralize free radicals, this research just came out actually about antioxidants. If you're exercising heavily, don't take antioxidants because it neutralizes the free radicals that signal this mild inflammatory response that tells your body to get stronger. So, if you could neutralize all free radicals, you'd be dead in about 48 hours because your immune system would stop working. Maybe not 48 hours, maybe 72. But your immune system needs free radicals, not an overabundance, not an underabundance. And last but not least, this idea that the free radicals are the cause of inflammation, that's the cause of all problems, just patently false. Inflammation can be problematic for certain kinds of medical issues, but not for this sort of broad stroke that is being presented.
Well, it's the reason why cold plunges have actually been shown to be, that you were meant to be beneficial for recovery, but actually they've been shown to inhibit muscle hypertrophy. So Correct. Actually getting in a cold plunge and reducing your inflammation is actually a bad thing if you want to get bigger and stronger. Correct.
It feels really good, but there's a time and a place. Like there's been debates about if you do have an injury, say muscle soreness or any kind of injury, do you use heat or cold or some combination of heat or cold? The idea is you're trying to promote circulation. And you can use heat and cold. You're trying to deal with certain amounts of inflammatory response that can get in the way. So when I had shoulder surgery, I'm in a cold thing, like 24/7 for a week because there was just massive inflammation. But then it was onto heat and then onto cold and heat, then onto ultrasound and, all these things, mostly just improving circulation. And if you're going to get into any sort of performance enhancing drug conversation, that's the time that you use something like that for a mild time when you're just helping with the dealing with the healing response, not the inflammatory response.
Now, something I want to wrap up with is you've sold a very good story about barefoot shoes, backed by science, backed by research. It's very compelling.
Hold on, wait, hold on, but I got to interject with that.
Yeah,
there's a problem with the research that's anti-barefoot or that's pro, normal shoes. So I'm going to do a couple really quickly. The research that came out of the University of Colorado with the big Nike shoes was shown to improve VO2 max by 4% in the runners in that study. There's some problems with the study, but ignoring that for a moment, it did not say it was a 4% improvement in performance. If it was just about VO2 max, we'd line people up at a race, do their VO2 max, and hand out awards. But it's not. But Nike calls it the 4% improvement shoe. And everyone interprets that as improvement in performance. Never proven to do that. The other thing is the design of these studies is really bad. Again, it's about form, not footwear. It's about optimal human functioning, not footwear. So a lot of these studies are designed. We took runners who were in regular shoes and we put them in some barefoot shoes before we did the test about which is better, and we let them acclimate to the barefoot shoes by running in them for 5 minutes. I'm sorry, what? That is not the appropriate test. The appropriate test is something, there's a couple. Let's take a couple of different groups of people. We keep some in regular shoes, some in barefoot shoes, and give them instruction and some feedback and some video like we talked about, and some just put them in the shoes and let them go about it. And watch what happens over the course of a year. See what happens with performance, with health and wellness measures, with comfort, with all these things that we can measure among the three groups. That's a real study. That's a $20 million study. The only people who can afford that are the companies that have the least interest in spending that kind of money. So, I read these studies that are sort of anti-barefoot, and the methodologies are so flawed. Here's a kicker. Again, we talked about it's form, not footwear. I've never seen one study, and I'm happy if someone shows me one, where they're actually looking at people's form, not just looking at whatever other measure, but looking and seeing what is actually changing. I did a pilot study with Dr. Bill Sands, who used to work with the Olympic Committee, where we actually looked at form. That was all we looked at, was what happens if you take someone in regular shoes, have them go barefoot or in our sandals or in the five-finger shoes. And when you take someone out of shoes and put them barefoot, 90% of them, their form changed immediately. And for the other 10%, I could get them to change with about 10 seconds of instruction. If you put them in our sandals, it was identical to Barefoot. If you put them in the 5-finger shoes, the first thing that kicked off the Barefoot movement, only about 20% actually changed. And people who were accomplished barefoot runners, when they were in bare feet, great form. When they put on the 5 fingers, started overstriding and heel striking. They couldn't feel enough. So we didn't turn that into a full study for a number of reasons, mostly finance and the people who were running it moving away and getting out of research. But no one's looked at form. And when doctors say, oh, I'm seeing more patients than ever thanks to this Barefoot thing. You're putting my kids through college. Ha, ha, ha. I go, well, you said that when running shoes came out in 1972. And again, it's form, not footwear. So have you, first of all, when they come into your place and ask and say they're running barefoot, are they in bare feet? Are they in a truly minimalist shoe? Or are they in a shoe that is being called minimalist that still has pointy toes, still has a heel lift, still too thick, still too stiff? And have you looked at their form? Do you know how to analyze and correct their form? And I've never had a doctor say yes to any of those.
What I wanted to highlight was the reason why I wanted to speak to you specifically out of all of the founders of minimalist shoe brands is because I saw a video rebuttal that you did with a creator who he released a 9-minute video called Barefoot Industry Lies or something like that.
Yeah.
And you got in touch with him off the back of the video, which I don't think is something you typically see from a CEO. Usually they're being reached out to, like I did for you, to feature on their show. So this to me told me a story. This said, Stephen clearly cares enough that he wants to be part of the conversation. You didn't want to do a reaction video, you said. You wanted to do an interview where you could have a back and forth. And that to me, that's really compelling. And I really love that. And it's a great interview as well. And you really put the points across. You, like I mentioned, you're really science-backed, research-backed. The only question I have there, well, it's really a question that might come from the audience is, well, you are the co-founder of a barefoot shoe brand. Of course you're going to be rebutting a video like this, and of course you're going to be sold on the benefits of barefoot shoes. So how can we trust you, not as the co-founder of a barefoot shoe brand, but somebody who really genuinely believes in the science that underpins all of this?
Yeah, it's easy. Don't believe a word I said. Research it. I mean, everything I'm saying, again, there's 3 kinds of research. One is just the common sense part. Let's look at these things, movement, flexibility, freedom, all these things we talked about. Look at a regular shoe. It doesn't make sense. That's thing number 1. Compare it to a minimalist shoe where it doesn't get in the way of all those things. That makes sense. Number 2, look at the anecdotal information. Again, I'm not going to say anecdotes equal data, but when we have like 80,000 reviews and the average is 4.8 out of 5 stars, there's something worth looking at there. And then do the actual research, which no one will do. There's I wish I had the link. I'll find you the link and I'll give it to you. There's a paper that came out from the top researchers in this field. And they didn't come to it believing in this stuff. They started doing the research and then they believed it because of what the research showed them. I'll give you my favorite one, Christine Pollard out of Oregon State University. Wanted to research cushioning in shoes because, well, shoes were getting more and more cushioning. So clearly more is better, right? And it turned out that any cushioning, or let me say it this way, she didn't find any reduction in tibial loading forces, the force going into your knee, with the normal cushion shoes. And the more cushion shoes not only didn't make it better, but often made it worse. And the counterintuitive reason why is, again, your brain is trying to feel what you're stepping on and stepping in so it knows how to move you. The more you get in the way, the harder you land to get some feedback. I almost said fucking feedback and then I couldn't resist, and so I just said fucking feedback. So some of the stuff is just, counterintuitive until you think about it a little more. I'm the first to admit the biggest obstacle that I have is exactly what you said, that people think that I have a conflict of interest, forgetting that I started the company because of my experience, not to just take advantage of something that's going on. But there's a paper that's on our website called Stepping Back to Minimal Footwear, Applications Across the Lifespan. And what it's literally like from kids to elderly people, where does this apply? There are 4.5 pages of notes, like 200 different pieces of research that are backing up both the anti-normal shoe and the pro-natural movement. It's not about the shoes, it's about natural movement. And if you want to dive into that, It's brilliantly researched. Now, again, here's the problem. If people have a belief, you can't convince them by giving them data. The first step they need to take is to be curious. How do you make someone curious? I don't know. I would say by putting people into a state of cognitive dissonance with things like weaker better than stronger, feeling better than whatever, and look at, your experience again. And then just kind of wonder and just take a look. And again, if you're going to really dive into the research hard, you need to know how to evaluate the study. Like the first piece of research proving that barefoot was worse for you than having some cushioning came again out of the University of Colorado. And I confronted the researcher. I said, you said in your study, which only involved 12 people, which is not a big deal, that you used accomplished barefoot runners. I know all the accomplished barefoot runners in this neighborhood. I'm one of them. Neither they nor I were in your study. I know the people that were in your study. They're not accomplished barefoot runners. They're accomplished runners who do a little bit of training in bare feet at the end of their workout on the grass. Not the same. I said in an early panel discussion, when people were making this shit up, like in 2010, people were coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, to switch to barefoot, it's going to take you 5 years. Like, where did that come from? You don't have any data for that at all. That's just your opinion. And by the way, have you run barefoot on the road? Well, no. I go, well, if you haven't run enjoyably barefoot on a road for at least a mile, you have no reason to be throwing out your opinion if you have no research behind it either. It's just your opinion out of nowhere, pulled it totally out of your butt. And I'm not okay with that. So yes, conflict of interest. It can look that way. I get it. But there's nothing that I'm saying that isn't common sense, backed by a preponderance of anecdotal data or actual science. So, ignore me. I don't care. I've actually half joked. The best thing that could happen for what I do trying to spread the message is that someone eventually buys my company and fires me. I got no conflict then. I'm done. I mean, I ask questions like, if your feet don't feel as good at the end of the day as they did at the beginning of the day, why? And if you say, oh, well, because shoes hurt, they don't have to. I mean, look at little kids. If you watch little kids before they get into regular shoes and you look at them running, there's a couple really cool things. They have awesome form. They have just the right amount of body lean. They're not using too much energy. They have this weird look on their face called smiling that you only see in adults if they're running in bare feet or, truly minimalist shoes. They do it for fun. There's no reason it can't be like that now. But if you're just trying to put in the miles and if you're in shoes that squeeze your toes together and don't let you feel, don't let you move, don't let you connect to the ground. And a friend of mine said, when I walk in your shoes, it's like instant moving meditation because I'm getting feedback. I'm paying attention. Research from Dr. Kirk Erickson showed that elderly people who walked more retained more gray matter in their brain. I said, why do you think that is? He goes, the stimulation from walking and being in the surroundings. I said, imagine what it would have been like if they were barefoot or in a minimalist shoe. He goes, oh yeah, that would have been really interesting. But that was a very expensive 9-year longitudinal study. We couldn't recreate that. So anyway, I totally get the point. But backing up to the video that I made, and his YouTube channel is Chase Mountains. I was doing less trying to promote barefoot shoes than point out some problems with the logic of the argument. So when he said, these are the lies that barefoot shoe companies are telling you, I said, or the industry is telling you, I said, I and one other brand, Vivo Barefoot, we are the industry. Put together, we are the industry. We've never said any of those things. So who are you talking about? And that was the fundamental thing. It's called a straw man argument. You're making up an imaginary person who has a position and then arguing with that person as if that person is representative of the actual people. And that was the fundamental point that I made. And I'm sure I made others, but I don't remember. And I adore Chase because he was willing to have this conversation. And it was a 2-hour conversation, and he cut it down to about an hour. So I applaud him for finding a way to do that in a way that really kept the story of our conversation really, really clear and didn't go, off too far.
And he was super humble, and even in the show notes for the episode, he said, I'm happy to be wrong if I can be proven right. I thought he was And the fact that he accepted the interview, a rebuttal to his own video, I thought that was fantastic.
Well,
and that's what we need to see more of, I think, in this space and generally.
Agreed. I mean, first of all, I'm also really appreciative that he's a guy who's smart enough and curious enough to, when I say, hey, it's a straw man argument and here's what that means, he's like, oh, and recognized it. Not a lot of people are willing to do that. It's my favorite thing. If somebody could prove that everything I said is bullshit, I would be the first one to shut this shit down.
Yeah,
but
I've got a person in my life who can prove everything I say is bullshit, and that is my wife.
It's like, people really admired the psychologist Carl Jung, and they thought he was wonderful, and someone said, ask his wife. So,
Exactly.
But in this case, my wife doesn't think it's bullshit because it changed her life as well, and she's my co-founder and runs the company with me. So I do a podcast called The Movement, and at the end of every one of them, I say, if you have any suggestions, anyone who should be on the show, drop me an email, especially if you know someone who thinks I have a case of cranial rectal reorientation syndrome. And I would love to have those conversations. They don't end well for the other person. I'm in them not infrequently, like at the American College of Sports Medicine, they'll have a panel discussion about footwear, and they put me in it. And it's embarrassing for the people who are from the regular shoe companies. So there was a guy from Brooks who said, one of the points was something like, we're just trying to give you a good quality shoe that feels comfortable and propels you forward. I grabbed the microphone. I said, do you mind if I'm obnoxious for 30 seconds? He goes, yeah, okay, go ahead. I said, nothing propels you forward other than your legs. All foam sucks energy out of the system. You can't violate the laws of physics. And I hand the microphone back, and he goes, okay, we don't violate the laws of physics. I did this earlier with guys from Adidas and I don't remember which company. And same thing. I mean, for every point they made, at the end, it's like the question was, what's next for footwear? And one of them was saying 3D printed midsoles. And the other said 3D printed outsoles. And I said, cool. Where's your proof that improves performance or reduces injuries? Dead silence. I said, that's just another version of the same thing you've been doing for 50 years. It's another version of cushioning that we know does not help. So it's a great story. It's a simple story. Why when any of these companies come out with some new magic technology, do they not apologize for the crap they were selling up until then? And it's like the boy who cried wolf, except in this case, it's the shoe company that cried cushioning and arch support. It's a new version of the same thing. It didn't work for you before, but I'm sure this one's going to work. And everyone, instead of getting smart like the villagers do, they all run to the shoe store and get the new best thing. And when it doesn't work, they assume it's a problem with them, because these are multi-billion-dollar companies that are clearly doing a bunch of research. And then they go out and they spend money on another multi-billion-dollar industry, all the products to try to fix those shoes, inserts and orthotics and arch support and all those other things. Why is there another multi-billion-dollar company for things to improve shoes? The shoe companies know what those things are. Why don't they just build that stuff in? Because they know something else. They know that stuff doesn't work either. And if they built that stuff into the shoe and people didn't have the right experience, that would be proving that they've been lying. I'm in an industry with some of the most amazingly, for lack of a term, well, I'll try and not get sued, but I'm talking about the industry. I'm not mentioning anyone by name. People who mislead their customers more than any other industry I can think of in the world. And they've been doing it nonstop for 50 years. And I think it's morally reprehensible. And I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to pull the rug out from underneath that so that people can't be fooled by simple stories that aren't true. And I'm trying to help change the world by giving people the experience of doing what's natural and supporting you as much as is necessary with, something to protect your foot. So if you need more traction on a trail, we do that. If you need more insulation in the winter, we do that. But basically, as close to natural as you can possibly be for everything that you do, so you can live a longer, happier, healthier life. So you're not going to do what my dad did, which he had, always pointy shoes, big, thick, a lot of cushioning, tripped on a tiny little thing, fell down, broke his hip, and died 2 weeks later. And people will call me callous for saying it as simply as that, but it was 9 years ago. I'm kind of over it. We didn't get along that well anyway. But it was not lost on me that this was in part because he shuffled when he walked, because that was the only way his brain would know what the hell was going on, because he couldn't step, because he didn't have good balance by that point. and they hit some little thing, went over. So that's not okay. Watching people have hip, knee, back, plantar fascia, whatever issues that I know are being caused by footwear, and this is unequivocal, that's not okay when there's and let's not even call it a simple solution, when there's something that can at least make a difference. Maybe it's not going to solve it 100%, but at least it can make a difference and make it so maybe you can't run anymore, but you can walk for a couple miles when you couldn't do either before. Maybe you're not hiking Kilimanjaro, but you're handling the hills around your house. Maybe, you're not, fill in the blank. You're going to do the best you can. You would never think if your arm was in a cast for 8 weeks and it came out weaker when you get the cast off, you would never think, well, that's just the way it is. You're going to do something to get it back in shape as much as you can. If it takes you 6 months or a year of using your feet naturally to get the benefits of the strength and balance and agility and feedback that can create, why would you not do that? It takes no effort. It takes no time, really. It takes a little time to get used to it, but why would you not do that? And I was going to say something. My goal is to help make that happen as much as I can before I die. And I'm getting a little choked up because a year ago, it was iffy about whether I might. I had literally said to a bunch of people in professional basketball, I'm here to help try and change the world. And I want to do as much as I can before I die. And 24 hours earlier, I had been given a cancer diagnosis. And so they didn't know how poignant that was for me. I don't know how long I got. I mean, I'm fine. Just FYI. It was a rare cancer in my eye. Totally fine as far as we can tell. But, none of us know how long we have. I want to do as much as I can to help make this happen before I can't. And at the same time, have an enjoyable life with my wife and my dog and my friends. But that part's easy now because we have so many people all around the world who love what we do that if we want to travel and go somewhere, we can literally say, hey, we're going to be in this area. Who wants to get together and hang out and have a bunch of fun and spread the word? What could be better?
Really powerful way to end. Stephen, Sashen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Stephen Sashen, co-founder of Xero Shoes there. You can find out more at xeroshoes.com. Coming up, I'll be speaking to one of the co-founders of Flow Neuroscience, a company that's created a headset that treats depression better than antidepressants without the side effects. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. Remember, you don't need all the latest gadgets and upgrades to be healthy. It's the fundamentals that matter the most. Sleep, nutrition, and exercise. I just find all the extra stuff fun as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.